Steel is one of the harder to acquire resources in game. You either have to grind your way through ranked, play your way through clan battles, buy your way through the dockyard, or sometimes it does pop up in the battle pass, and you can get lucky from some containers or certain events where it is given away. But either way, you usually don't get a whole lot of it at one time, and if you were to save it up for a steel ship, you're going to be doing that for a bit. Even fellas like myself that play this game on a daily basis and make YouTube videos for this game, I still can maybe afford like one steel ship a year. That's how rare steel is. So obviously, if you are saving this steel up, you want to make a good decision when it comes to picking up a steel ship. And we're going to try and help you guys out with that today by going over my top 5 steel ships. So any of the ships in this video I would highly recommend to pick up for steel. Obviously, you know, each ship is a little bit different in terms of what purpose it will fulfill in game. Some of them are more competitive, some of them are more fun, but either way, any ship on this list would be a solid choice in my humble opinion. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. But if you do find yourself enjoying this video find it informational, helpful, or entertaining, please make sure to drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. All that jazz helps out on the YouTube side of things. But let's go ahead and get going with number 5. And that is the Tier 10 Italian battle cruiser, the Lauria. Now, the Lauria is one of the newer still ships. Wargaming don't really add too many still ships to the game because, you know, again, it is kind of difficult to acquire still in the first place. So we get, I think, like one a year, one or maybe 2 a year. And the Lauria is, again, one of the newer still ships on the block. So what she is a massive Italian battle cruiser armed with 457mm guns, 8 of them with sap. That's right, this thing gets massive sap shells, which is completely ridiculous when it comes to the amount of alpha damage you can do with these sap shells. And if you guys don't know, sap is, again, a very dirty description of it, is that it's HE coded to have a negative fire chance, but has, you know, massive alpha damage potential, and it pins a whole hell of a lot more than HE shells of the same caliber do. So you get better pins and higher alpha damage out of it, but it has no chance to do any type of damage over time. But at the same time too, it doesn't have quite as much alpha as like AP, but you get much more consistent pins with it, which means that the Lauria can be a very good source for consistent damage, especially when you're going up against ships that are not as well armored as, you know, like battleships and such. Like some of the not some of the battle cruisers, any battle cruiser you come across in game, the Lauria will actually tear them up. Even battleships, if you manage to hit their bow or their stern or their superstructure, you can easily chunk them for like 20k if you can manage to get all shells to land on target. It is absolutely ridiculous what this ship can do with those sap shells. Now, of course, the downside of this is that, well, you don't have any HE at all, so you don't have any way to do any type of damage over time. So some ship does get super saturated from you farming it all the time. You're kind of out of luck. And when it comes to dealing with destroyers and such, you don't have the HE shells where you can, you know, do a more reasonable amount of damage to destroyers. You're still going to do a bit of damage to them because, you know, 18-inch sap shells hitting a destroyer isn't exactly a fun time for it, but obviously, again, it's not HE, and with the sap limitations when it comes to caliber, you know, you're not doing as much damage as you would if you were firing HE, because the amount of damage you apply to destroyers with sap shells over, I think it's like 200mm, is greatly reduced than, you know, it would be if it was HE. It's like 200, I think 250mm, something like that. But either way, also it is a battle cruiser, so obviously she isn't as heavily armored as a, you know, as a true battleship would be, and she has lower HP because of that. But she's a fairly maneuverable ship because, you know, the trade-off for having not great survivability is a higher degree of maneuverability than a battleship. Still has a pretty big turning circle because she is still a pretty long ship overall. But as far as like just a fun ship to take into random battles and to bully, again, heavy cruisers, battle cruisers, and light cruisers with, she's a really solid contender for that. And she still has AP, and the Italian AP isn't exactly anything to laugh at either. So if someone is showing you broadside and you can get those AP shells in the tubes, by all means do it, and you will utterly slap the living crap out of them with the, again, 18-inch shells that you get with the Lauria here, which does still have that 30mm overmatch, because while they aren't 460mm shells, they're still 457s, which can overmatch 30mm of armor. So when you're dealing with, again, some of the larger cruisers that we have in game nowadays, you can still overmatch them with your AP. Although again, with the SAP Alpha, it's best just to stick with the SAP. Is it a super competitive ship? Nah, not really. Again, with the lack of armor and HP, you won't be seeing the ship pop up too much in clan battles or anything super competitive because of that. But if you don't really care about competitive, you want a fun ship to take into random battles, a completely insane and goofy ship, the Lauria is most definitely something I can recommend for that. And that is, why it's at number 5, because it's not really super competitive, but it is still, at the end of the day, quite fun. Alright, going our way down now to number 4, we have the Tier 10 American light cruiser, the Austin. The Austin, quite simply, is, for 15 seconds at a time, it is the best ship in the game. The Austin's whole thing is that, as you see, it's absolutely coated in these dual 5-inch turrets, right? It's a big Atlanta, but it gets SAP. And while its base reload time is 8 seconds, you see, when you hit your reload booster, which you have an unlimited amount of, you get an 80% buff to your reload time, to where now this, again, Atlanta levels of firepower now gets an 80% buff to their reload, which means you are an absolute bullet hose with SAP shells, with 5-inch SAP. And remember what I said about it with the Lauria. You get the improved pin and the improved alpha damage. So for 15 seconds at a time, you're an absolute DPM hose. And if you really know how to aim, which the SAP shells on the Austin, I believe the HE shells too, they get better ballistics than the normal American shells that, feel like they hang in the air for 6 years before they arrive at the target ship. So it's a lot easier to aim at range. So if you pick your targets right, you can absolutely shred somebody down in just a few seconds with the Austin. Now, of course, the trade-off for that is when that consumable is on cooldown, you have a very long 8-second reload with small guns, which, yeah, you have SAP, but again, you're really, really suffering in terms of the DPM when you don't have that reload going. So, yeah, it's a one-trick pony, but it's a really, really fun and funny trick when it does work out for you. It is really easy to, like, if you catch something like an American heavy cruiser, really anything that the SAP shells can reliably pin, so like the British cruisers, the American cruisers, if you catch one of them completely off guard and you can keep your shells on them for that full 15 seconds and get all those shells to pin, you are going to absolutely murder them with the amount of shells and the damage you're going to be doing to them in that 15 seconds. Let alone if you run across a poor destroyer, you catch him out in the open, you are going to rip him a new one. So on top of all that, you still get hydroacoustic search, which is great for dealing with finding torpedoes and of course dealing with submarine torpedoes and shit and destroyers hiding in smoke. You get the 10.5 kilometer torpedoes, usable torpedoes on an American cruiser, which is kind of nuts, and you get DFAA as well. Also, the Austin does have a nice 32mm midsection, so if you angle right, they ain't got 460mm guns, 18.1-inch guns or bigger, you can bounce their shells off of your side, which is absolutely hilarious considering, most ships like this, well, the other light cruisers kind of explode when they get caught out in the open, but you can, if you know how to angle correctly, tank them in the Austin. So that's kind of just, goofy there, right? And it's just a fun, goofy ship that has a really funny button that, again, has unlimited charges. There are no limits to your reload booster on the Austin. So it's just so fun. So when you get matches with like Arms Race, where you get the buffs and such, and you can get that reload really going, and then you have Halsey, when he pops his Confederate skill, oh yeah, you are really getting into some serious DPM at that moment. So Austin, goofy ship, fun ship. Can it be in competitive? Ran it a couple of times with various degrees of success, but probably not super competitive, but again, a fun ship, and one that, if you don't have really any real interest in going into like clan battles or anything super competitive, one that would be a fun random battleship for sure. And going on our way down to number 3 now, we have the Tier 10 Soviet cruiser, the Stalingrad, the OG Soviet bias ship. Now, Stalingrad, if I was making this video, 5 years ago, Stalingrad would easily be number 1. But a lot has changed over the years, and Stalingrad is one of the earliest large quote-unquote cruisers. We used to call these things super cruisers before we had actual super cruisers in the game. So it was first the Stalingrad and the Kronstadt, and then slowly over time, we got the Aegir, the Siegfried, the Alaska, so forth and so on. So a lot's changed in terms of the ships that the Stalingrad's going up against, and in terms of the mechanics that have changed over time. Stalingrad used to be this thing that you just wouldn't kill, or if you were dedicated to killing it in competitive, you were going to be sitting there for quite some time trying to kill this thing, because it still does have, great armor for a cruiser, huge HP pool for a cruiser. And back in the day, it had the cruiser burn time, that 20-second burn time. So back when you could take whatever commander skills you wanted on whatever ship you wanted, you used to be able to build into the survivability skills that the battleships would use to get their burn time down lower. And you would have this, completely just, inconsequential burn time on the Stalingrad, where if you were halfway decent at balancing your damage con and your heals, fires didn't really mean a whole lot to you. And it has a 12-kilometer radar, absolutely railgun accurate guns as well, so if you were trying to flank the thing and torpedo it, it could radar you, and now you have railgun accurate HE going towards you. And obviously if you were playing competitive, you wouldn't send the Stalingrad out by itself, you would send like a screening destroyer or something else out there with it, to where again it would just survive for so long and be a pain in your side, let alone taking it into random battles with all that going on with it. So it was an absolute beast back in the day. But again, things have changed. You can't take those survivability skills with it anymore. They have nerfed it a little bit here over the years as well. It's caught a couple of direct nerfs, but it is still a very fearsome cruiser, because the guns are still very good. While yes, it burns for the full battleship burn time now, it still has those Soviet bias AP shells that carry their pin way further out than any cruiser normally does, because the air drag coefficient doesn't exist with the Soviet shells. So with the Stalingrad's guns, with how fast they're going and their pinning capabilities, you can still citadel a good chunk of battleships at almost your maximum range with the Stalingrad's ballistics, let alone when we're talking about cruisers, right? And you still get the 12-kilometer radar, and it still has all that HP, and it still has all that armor, so it's still a very solid ship in today's World of Warships. But again, with the other, large cruisers that have been added in that can do some things a little bit different than the Stalingrad, and some things a little bit better than the Stalingrad, it has, fallen a little bit from its god status, but it is still a very, very good cruiser. It's not quite as popular as it used to be for competitive, so it's still a pretty popular pick. But again, it's not everywhere like it used to be, and it still does get limited in a lot of competitive settings because of its ability. So if it's a ship that's still being limited in competitive settings, it still has some purpose there. But again, it's not like the first round draft pick like it used to be, but it is still a very, very good ship. And if you are looking to get into competitive, if you have a Stalingrad, I do know most clans will still probably take you in because you have a Stalingrad. And in random battles too, it is still a very good ship. If you want to just bleed people with the AP that this thing has, absolutely. And then you have Kuznetsov with it as well, with his, Build to Victory talent, where you just don't die when you get down to 10% HP. Yeah, it's still a very survivable and a very, very good ship in today's World of Warships. And that brings us on down now to our number 2 slot, which is the Tier 10 Japanese battleship, the Shikishima. So the Shikishima, first off, gun sound is excellent on the Shikishima. You get that nice Shikishima gun firing sound effect. So you get to hear that every 20-ish seconds, depending upon what your build on the Shikishima is. And she has 20-inch guns, which are just absolutely ridiculous. So Now, the thing about the Shikishima's guns is that they are 20-inch guns, which, they give them, plenty of alpha damage. You aren't really overmatching anything that the Yami can't overmatch, which is, something to consider, because the 20-inch guns, I think you can pin, like, what is it, like 35 millimeters of armor or something like that. It's some inconsequential threshold that you can pin. I think it's like something on the Hindenburg you can pin, and one other ship that you can pin that the Yami can't pin. So you don't really, get it because it has the overmatching capabilities. It's because of the alpha damage and like the gun sounds. The guns are also incredibly accurate. It has the Yami legendary mod baked into it, so that's cool. That means you can take the reload mod in the last mod slot on the Shikishima and have some very fast firing 20-inch guns here. And as you can see, she has like excellent dispersion at times. Sometimes, again, you still roll a bad roll with the RNG and you get a bit of wonky salvo here and there, but in most cases it's pretty accurate. And if you really like to snipe, the Shikishima is a really good pickup for you. What's also cool about the Shikishima is that with more and more modes like asymmetrics and mode shuffle becoming a thing now, you can kind of lean back into what used to be her thing, in my opinion, back in the day, which is her secondaries. If you notice up and down the side on the Shikishima, she has Harugumo turrets. These turrets pin 30 millimeters of armor with their HE, which is really good. They also have a nice firing rate as well, and they're decently accurate once you build into them and once you get their range out as well. And again, in modes like mode shuffle, when you're playing airship escort and convoys and so forth and so on, you really can actually use them, unlike we've been able to in the past few years with the meta that is, the random battles meta. So that's kind of, resurfacing with the Shikishima. I was playing a bunch of her in mode shuffle, and she was doing very well with a secondary build. Am I saying slap a secondary build on her and take her into randoms? No, I would probably go for a main battery build. But she is a very fun ship if you have the Yami. If you're used to that playstyle, you do that with the Shikishima, but it's just hilarious when, one or two shells hit some tier 9 and tier 10 battleship and you unexpectedly, chunk them for like 30k because one shell managed to get through and hit the Citadel. And, that's just, a very happy feeling when that happens with the Shikishima. So you get the funny gun noise, you get the big guns, you get the big damage, you get the secondary guns. Hey, what's not to like here with the Shikishima, in my opinion? And that takes us on down now to number 1, which is the tier 10 French battleship, the Bourgogne. Yes, it's the Bourgogne. The Bourgogne is a ship that simply has a cult following because it statistically is the best battleship in the game. If you go look at the numbers, the Bourgogne is number 1 in, I think, pretty much every category when it comes to battleships, because it is pretty good. So the Bourgogne is a turbocharged Alsace. She is the top of the hidden second French battleship line, because we have the Strasbourg, we have the Leon now. No, we have the Strasbourg, then the Leon, then we have the Jean Bar, and now we have the Bourgogne. So it's the ship from a tier lower in the French battleship tech line, given a reload booster and some other tweaks, and then they shove it a tier higher. That's literally what they've done with this hidden second line of French battleships. So the key differences between the Alsace and the Bourgogne: has more accurate guns, she has a quicker reload, she has the reload booster as well, and she has a different secondary gun setup from the Alsace. If you want a secondary French battleship, play the Alsace, not the Bourgogne. So that's it, and that's really all the Bourgogne really needed to be a really good ship, because the Alsace is already a pretty solid, dare I say, good tier 9, and when you take that formula and just make it better at tier 10, you've got a real winner here on your hands. So what's really cool about the Bourgogne is that, yes, she has 12 15-inch guns, which are tiny by tier 10 standards, but they're so accurate, it really doesn't matter. Because if someone's angling into you to where, they're bouncing your 15-inch shells, that's cool. I'll swap one over to HE. And when you damage con the 2 or 3 fires, I'm going to be setting on you because I'm landing frickin', 9 out of my 12 shells on you every salvo because of the increased accuracy of the Bourgogne shells, and you damage con those fires, I'm going to hit my reload booster and get 2 or 3 more fires on you here with my 2 or 3 quick follow-up salvos after your damage con runs out. So you're going to burn. And then when you show it broadside, you have that wonderful French AP. The French AP is really, really spicy. And when you show them broadside, now you get 12 15-inch shells coming at your broadside. Oh, and you got 2 salvos coming after that first salvo because, again, I pushed my reload booster button. So now you're murdering ships with your AP as you're burning them down with your HE. And she does get the engine boost as well, the French battleship thing. So she's a very fast ship when it comes to, trying to get on a flank. That's what she's really good at. You find a hole in the enemy team's lines, you get on their side, now you have their side, all these ships' sides, because they have to choose to pick. They have to pick between angling to you or angling to your team. Now you're throwing your AP into their broadside while they're trying to angle to your team. And again, they angle into you, use your HE, and burn them down. Now, of course, obviously, a huge downside is that she is a Tier 9 ship up tier to Tier 10. So she has less HP than your Tier 10 battleships, and she has less armor than your Tier 10 battleships. And she has the French armor, too, so she's absolutely coated in 32 millimeters of armor absolutely everywhere. So it's very easy for you to get farmed down in the Bourgogne, which means you really need a player on the move. You don't sit and tank in a Bourgogne. Well, you don't sit and tank in any of the French battleships. So if you're used to, playing that line, you should be okay there. But definitely stay on the move. Use your engine boost. Use your maneuverability to your advantage. Burn those fellas down that are going nose into you. AP those battleships and cruisers that are showing you their broadside. Oh, this again is another wonderful battleship to deal with destroyers, because you have those 12 guns with the reload booster, with the HE, with the accurate guns, and even without the reload booster, again, the base reload time of the Bourgogne is quite good, so she's excellent for dealing with destroyers. As far as competitive stuff goes, yeah, Bourgogne does show up sometimes if you're using a rush build where you get the Bourgogne, the Marseille, and maybe the Kleber, just the French fast boys, and just shove them down a flank and just overwhelm the enemy team there. We've seen that happen quite a bit. I think it was a couple seasons ago that was a pretty popular move, at least around Storm and clan battles on the North American side of things. So there's some potential there, but it's just a good ship all around either way, and again, the stats do most definitely prove it. So guys, those are my top 5 steel ships. Let me know in the comments down below, what would you add to this list, what would you remove from it, or what is your top 5 steel ships? Let me know all that jazz in the comments down below. Hope you guys have a wonderful Monday, wonderful rest of the week. I hope to catch you guys in the next one.